Today we are once again continuing in our journey through the first book of Samuel. And if you remember, this is a book that is about transitions. And it's the transition of the nation of Israel going from what type of leadership? A theocracy. You guys were talking too loud. If you don't mind just quieting those responses down a bit. Moving from a theocracy to a monarchy. Excellent. A nation that is led by God, theocracy, to a nation led by a king. And the primary character that's been kind of in the first part of the book has been a guy by the name of Samuel. That's right. Samuel served as the priest and the judge, and he actually anointed the first king of Israel, whose name is King Saul. Excellent. Good job. And so Saul's been kind of the character that we've been seeing really and hearing about for these most recent chapters. But recently we were introduced. Saul was a guy who really, he messed up in this sense that he honored what people thought above what God thought. In other words, he gave into peer pressure instead of actually following after God, doing the right thing. And so God says, okay, I want another king, a king that's going to come, that's going to lead my people. He's going to be a king after my own heart. And so Samuel goes to the house of Jesse and anoints a guy by the name of David to be the next king. And so David's been introduced in these most recent chapters to us. And we find David in this season, and he finds himself in this season where he's been anointed king, but he ain't living like a king. He is not in any way or fashion living out that royal life. And I think to many of us, it's kind of that place in between. He's kind of like hanging out in that space in between. It's kind of like you know that God has something for you. You know God has a plan and there's a purpose and you feel like there's a calling and there's some place where God wants you, but somehow where you are today is not that place. Well, that's where David finds himself. And on top of that, there's people that are criticizing him and kind of throwing shade on his life as he is in that place in between. And unlike Saul, David does hear the words of people, but he doesn't allow that to control him. His strength and his identity is not found in people. It's really found in God. And so we see David in all of this kind of finding his strength in the Lord. And so as we read through 1 Samuel chapter 17, which is where we are today, we're going to be reminded that sometimes the only way to silence the discouragement and the haters and the things that really, the tensions and challenges, sometimes the only way to handle those situations and those things is really to get our eyes off of those things, off of the battle at hand, and instead put our focus on God and on his word and worshiping him in the middle of those storms, just like the song we just sang. And as we do that, we run straight into the battle while we're focused on God. And it's only when our confidence shifts from ourselves and from what we do and our own abilities, it's only when we shift from that to really the ability of God that we really get to experience the victory that God has for us. So with that understanding, let's jump to 1 Samuel chapter 17, and we'll start with verse 1. The Philistines now mustered their army for battle, camped between Sukkah and Judah and Azekah and Ephes Dammim. Saul countered by gathering his Israelite troops near the valley of Elah. And so the Philistines and Israelites faced each other on opposite hills in the valley between them. I just want you to kind of understand the geography of what's happening here. If you kind of remember our map here, we have the Mediterranean Sea that's on the left, which is in the west. And then again, Israel's border, at least for this kind of conversation, Jordan River, Dead Sea, and the Sea of Galilee. And so it's here in the middle there, just west of Bethlehem, that we see kind of this area, this Valley of Elah. And you can go to the Valley of Elah today It's actually just kind of like this, it looks like a random field kind of off of the highway. There's no big sign there, but it's this area where there's basically these mountains or hills really. And then the hills kind of come down, and then there's almost like a plain. It's almost like a river valley or a riverbed that's there, that's in the middle of these hills. And so it's in this kind of setup or in this geography, the Philistines are on the western hills and the Israelites are camped on the eastern hills, and they're kind of facing each other as this is the Valley of Elah, the area where the battle is going to take place. Well, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, came out of the Philistine ranks to face the forces of Israel. He was over 9 feet tall. He wore a bronze helmet, and his bronze coat of mail weighed 125 pounds. He also wore bronze leg armor, and he carried a bronze javelin on his shoulder. The shaft of his spear was as heavy and thick as a weaver's beam, tipped with an iron spearhead that weighed 15 pounds. His armor bearer walked ahead of him carrying a shield. Goliath was a big guy. He was a guy that wore big and tall armor. I mean, he was like a big guy, okay? He did not have anybody around that was his size. He grew up really kind of being taller and bigger, more powerful than anybody around. And so in his natural kind of just the way he had grown up, he would have assessed people by their physical abilities, by looking at them. That's how he was. As a matter of fact, everybody in this narrative is going to be looking and assessing the situation based on kind of the physical attributes of what they see. Everybody, except for David. David's the only one who's different in that. But Goliath would have grown up gauging his opponent by how they looked. What's their size, their height. That would have determined in his mind how easy this is going to be. He says this, Goliath stood and shouted a taunt across the Israelites. "Why are you all coming out to fight?" he called. "I am the Philistine champion. You're only servants of Saul. Choose one man to come down here and fight me. If he kills me, then we will be your slaves. But if I kill him, then you will be our slaves." Goliath is demeaning the Israelites. He's making fun of their king. And he's saying, hey, listen, this doesn't need to be painful for everybody. Not everybody in your army needs to die today. He's like, why don't you just do this? I'm the champion of the Philistines. I'll come out to the middle of the field or the valley. You send out your strongest warrior, and let's just the two of us duke it out. And that way, the rest of us can all be alive. We don't need to get bloodied over this. Just the two of us will fight. And if I win, you guys be our slaves. If you win, we'll be your slaves. And that's kind of what Goliath is proposing in this moment. I defy the armies of Israel today. Send me a man who will fight me. When Saul and the Israelites heard this, they were terrified and they were deeply shaken. I think if we really think about this situation, most of us can probably relate to how the Israelites felt in this moment, right? It's the embarrassment, it's the public humiliation, it's the public shaming. It's them Goliath reminding them of their inadequacies, of their inabilities. Every time the Israelites came up to the battlefield or to the Valley of Elah, it was this discouragement. It was this reminder that they weren't powerful enough, that they couldn't win this battle. They would have walked away every time feeling discouraged and feeling rejected. The people had simply given up. They just kind of lost all hope. They couldn't see a way out of this. Fear had paralyzed them, and every time Goliath stood up to shout at them, he just made them afraid. And now the enemy is taunting them and saying, hey, listen, look at how big I am. Look at how powerful I am. And because of that, it's probably best for you just to give up now. Don't even try to fight. See, in the uncertainty of the moment, the enemy wants to plant doubt into our situations. He wants to produce doubt in us. And then when we have doubt and we give into that, then fear sets in. And what happens is fear destroys faith. It kills faith. Because what happens is our eyes become so fixated on the problem at hand, on the situation at hand, on our inability to handle the situation at hand, and we get so lost in fear that we just want to give up. Long before the battle even happens, Isaiah writes these words, God's saying this to us. He says this, don't be afraid. Isaiah chapter 41, verse 10. Don't be afraid, I'm with you. God says, don't be afraid, I am with you. He's like, don't be discouraged, I'm your God. And I'm going to strengthen you, and I'm going to help you, and I'm going to hold you up, not by your own strength or by some weak hand. I'm going to hold you up by my victorious right hand. In other words, my hand that brings power and authority and victory. Paul actually says it this way. He says, listen, guys, God didn't give you a spirit of fear. That's not what he gave you. He gave you a spirit of power, of love, and of self-discipline. This fear and timidity that we wrestle with, he's like, God didn't give that to you. That's not from me. God says you picked that stuff up on your own. He's like, I didn't give you that. I gave you a spirit of power and of love, of self-discipline. God doesn't want us to be governed by fear. That's not his plan. That's not his intent. He wants us to be led by faith in him, by trusting in him. And really, the only way to do this oftentimes is to get our eyes off of the problem, to get our eyes focused on God, and really to, just like we sang, lift up a song, lift up our worship in the middle of the storm. Because when we do that, we instead focus our eyes not on the situation, not on our abilities, not on our own strategies, but instead we focus our eyes on God and on his abilities. Now, David was the son of a man named Jesse, an Ephrathite from Bethlehem in the land of Judah. Jesse was an old man at that time, and he had 8 sons. If you remember, Ephrathah is just another name from Bethlehem. Around Christmas time, we talk about the passages out of Micah, and we hear that same term, Ephrathah. And so again, it's just an old term for Bethlehem. Jesse's 3 oldest sons, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shimea, had already joined Saul's army to fight the Philistines. David was the youngest son. David's 3 oldest brothers stayed with Saul's army, and David went back and forth so he could help his father with the sheep in Bethlehem. If we're thinking of this in terms of modern military kind of terms, the 3 oldest brothers, they were on active deployment. They were in active service right now. David was on reserves. He was coming kind of back and forth. For 40 days, every morning and every evening, the Philistine champion strutted in front of the Israelite army. I don't know if you can remember a season, I hope you're not in one right now, but I remember a season when fear gripped you. I'm not talking about just like, oh, I'm afraid of that little bug, or, I'm afraid it might rain tomorrow. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the fear that grips you and paralyzes you. I still remember a time in my life when that happened to me. There's a situation that happened at work, and it is like the enemy just put fear into me, and it gripped me. It kept me up at night. I couldn't go to bed. It was just consumed my every thought. It's just fear. And a lot of the fear is the fear of the unreasonable, right? It's like way beyond what was actually happening. It's fear. What the enemy does is that he plants fear in our mind. And he gets us to get so afraid of things that really are probably not even going to happen. But we get so afraid that we won't even go out. We won't even step out. We quit before the struggle actually happens. I don't know. How many of you guys know what I'm talking about there, where the enemy comes in and just like paralyzes you before you actually even start? See, that's what Goliath is doing right now. He's trying to intimidate them. He's trying to paralyze them with fear so that they won't even come out and fight. Can you imagine that? Right? An army deciding that they're going to not fight against another army because of one person, because of one man that was maybe 2 or 3 feet taller than everybody else. And because of that, we're going to just maybe give in to being your slaves. What? That's the enemy, right? It's unreasonable. But he gets us to be so afraid of things that we decide, okay, let's just cut our losses here and let's quit right now and we'll just be able to live as slaves. The enemy wants to cause us to quit long before we ever get to the fight. Goliath is arrogantly insulting and harassing the children of Israel, making them feel small and rejected and defeated. Well, one day Jesse said to David, "Take this basket of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread and carry them quickly to your brothers." He gave these 10 cuts of cheese to their captain. "See how your brothers are getting along and bring back a report on how they're doing." David's brothers were with Saul and the Israelite army at the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines. And so David left the sheep with another shepherd, and he set out early the next morning with the gifts, as Jesse, his dad, had directed him. He arrived at the camp just as the Israelite army was leaving for the battlefield with shouts and battle cries. And soon the Israelites and the Philistine forces stood facing each other, army against army. David left his things with the keeper of the supplies and hurried out to the ranks to greet his brothers. And as he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, came out from the Philistine ranks. And David heard him shout his usual taunt to the army of Israel. David's with his brothers. He's watching and listening to this situation unfold. Remember, one thing you need to understand about the geography here, about the valley of Elah and the hills there. When you're standing on the hills kind of bordering the valley of Elah, you can look into the distance and you can actually see Bethlehem. David, when he's up there at the camp, looking down in the valley, he can see Bethlehem. He could see his narrative of his life that happened before, of what God had done for him in the past. David could literally turn around and see what God had done. As soon as the Israelite army saw him, they began to run away in fright. "Have you seen the giant?" the men asked. I mean, the Israelites, just like everybody else in this narrative, except for David, they're focused on this giant. They're focused on the problem, on the ability of this giant, on the power of this giant, on the challenges of this giant. They're all focused on him. All eyes are on him. And as soon as the Israelite army saw him, they began to run away in fright. "Have you seen this giant?" the men asked. "He comes out each day to defy Israel. The king has offered a huge reward to anyone who kills him. He will give that man one of his daughters for a wife, and the man's entire family will be exempted from paying taxes." David asked the soldier standing nearby, "Excuse me? What did you just say? What will the man get for killing this Philistine and ending his defiance of Israel? Who is this pagan Philistine anyway, that he is allowed to defy the armies of the living God?" There are a couple of questions on David's mind as he's hearing all of this and he's coming to the battlefield with everyone. There's a couple of things on his mind. He's like, why are we letting this guy continue to blab about defying God and defying the armies of Israel? And what's going to happen to the guy who shuts him up? Like, those are the things that are on his mind. And these men gave David the same reply. Yes, they said that's the reward for killing him. Now remember, David is probably in high school age about this time, maybe a freshman, maybe even an 8th grader. And he's hearing about all of this. He's hearing this unfold. He's like, wait a second, what did you say? Are you telling me that anybody who shuts this guy up and takes him down is going to get to marry Saul's daughter? Whoa, wait a second, what? I get to marry into this powerful family? And remember, they would have had access in the royal family they would have had access to all the beauty treatments that would have been available. So it's very possible, we're reading into the text here, but there's very possible that Saul's daughters were good looking, okay? Don't go back and say, oh, Prince said something that wasn't in the Bible. I know that. I'm just telling you, it's very likely when you read around the narrative that that's probably something there. Otherwise, he would have been like, oh, I don't want to marry her, right? So he's like, oh, wait a second. Power? Good-looking wife? Sign me up. I'll shut this guy up. I'll do it. No taxes? But when David's oldest brother, Eliab, heard David talking to the men, he was angry. What are you doing here anyway? Man, what about those sheep that you're supposed to be watching? You're supposed to be taking care of them. Man, I know you, David. Proud and you're deceitful. Man, you just came here to see the battle, right? David asks a couple of questions and his brother gets what I'll say is unreasonably mad It's not a normal response, right? His brother, his oldest brother, should have been the one that was the most encouraging to him. He's the one that should have been like, yeah, hey, let me tell you about this, David. He should have taken him in. He should have cared for him. It's his responsibility. He was his brother's keeper. He should have been that. But instead, we see kind of this, this response that doesn't seem to match the question. Now, remember, there's a backstory. There's a backstory because it was before this that Samuel came to their house ready to anoint the next king of Israel. And remember, everybody thought it would have been this firstborn, the oldest son, the one that was the tallest guy, the one that looked like a king. But instead, Samuel passes over, says it's not him. And he passes over all his brother and he gets to the runt in the family. And they chose him. So Samuel had anointed David, passed over this oldest brother, and anointed David as a king. And so that's part of the narrative here. That's part of the tension that he just couldn't get over this. Eliab couldn't get over that. It created a frustration and a tension. And that's why whenever this opportunity is given, he's like, man, you're just proud. David hadn't done anything. He was just asking. And David responds like, man, what have I done now? Man, I just was asking a question. Like, I can hear his tone like, man, like lay off. I just was asking a question. He walked over to some others and he just leaves his brother at that point. He asked the same thing and he got the same answer. Well, David's question was reported to King Saul and the king sent for him. And this is David. He's in the presence of the king. Remember, King Saul is a guy we heard described earlier. He was head and shoulders above her, but he's a tall guy. He's a big guy. David's a boy. David walks into the courtroom of the king, into the area where the battle station, so to speak, where the king would have been. David walks in there and he's like, hey, don't worry about this Philistine, King Saul. I'll go fight him. I'll take him down. And Saul's like, man, don't be ridiculous. Are you kidding me? He said, there's no way that you can fight this guy and win. He's like, you're a boy. You're a kid. Man, this guy, this giant, he's been a man of war since his youth. Man, there is no way that you can handle this. Right? How many times have you heard that? Maybe it's not from somebody else, but maybe it's from your own head. Maybe the enemy's speaking to you. Man, there's no way you can handle this. You're going down on this one. No way out. You might make it, but you're going to be severely broken on the other side. You can't, just stay down, man. There's no way you can do this. No way. See, that's what's happening here. Everybody's looking at the stuff that's on the physical. They're all looking in the natural. Everybody is just seeing what can be seen with regular eyes. Now, one thing I want you to realize as we're going through this narrative, see, we all know how the narrative ends. We all do. And so it's real easy to kind of gloss over some of this stuff. But I want you to drink in the details as we're going through this. I want you to remember and experience how the Israelites would have felt, how this Goliath would have come after them, and day after day after day, they would have felt smaller and smaller and more rejected and hopeless. That's how the army felt. I want you to feel and understand how Eliab felt. Man, I was passed over. I was the one that was passed over. How Saul felt. Man, Goliath, the Philistines, they keep on publicly humiliating me. I'm supposed to be the king. I'm supposed to be leading. But I'm afraid I don't have the ability. We can't do anything. Should we just give up? Oh, great. And now I got some middle school kid in my room saying he can take down the giant. There's no way you can. And then you got David. He's like, man, I'll take him. He's like, I'll get him. I'll get him for you, Saul. And all of this is happening. David persisted. He says he kept on even after Saul said, you can't do it. David persisted. And then he gives Saul his resume. He says this, he says, I've been taking care of my father's sheep and goats, he said. When a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, man, I go after it with a club and I rescue the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, then I catch it by the jaw and I'll club it to death. He's like, I've done this to both lions and bears, and I'll do it the same thing to this pagan Philistine too, for he has defied the armies of the living God. He says this, the Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and from the bear, that same God who rescued me, that God who rescued me back on those hills back there that you see, when I used to watch my dad, he's like, that same God who rescued me from there, that in the back there on those hills, he's the same God that is with me today. And he will rescue me from this Philistine. So after enough of David's resume of how he trusted in God and enough of David pointing back to the hills of Bethlehem and saying, hey, listen, back then, God helped me, he'll help me now. There was this bear that attacked me on that hill back there, and I took him and I jacked his jaw and I got the lamb back. And then back there on that other hill over there, back on the western hills of Bethlehem, he's like, there was a lion one time that came after this little sheep that I had, and it was my dad's favorite sheep, and I went after that thing and I crushed it, I killed it. I smacked it in the face. He's like, I'm going to do the same thing to this. The Lord's going to help me do the same thing to this Philistine. Saul finally consented. He's like, all right, go ahead. I mean, I guess at this point, Saul's like, I got nothing better. He's like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? This guy's going to get killed. And we're all going to be servants anyway. He'd already lost. He had lost the battle in his mind. King Saul, the leader, had lost the battle in his mind. He ends, may the Lord be with you. See, David had spent so much time alone with God that he couldn't see anything but the size of God. He had spent so much time and so many moments on the hills there in Bethlehem that he couldn't get past the size of his God. He couldn't see, he couldn't recognize anything else. David is the only one in this entire narrative that recognizes the size of Goliath compared to the size of God. David had the proper perspective. Everybody else was just looking here. David was looking up. David was recognizing the source of his help. He didn't allow the fear and the anxiety and the circumstance to control him. And then Saul gave David his own armor, a bronze helmet and a coat of mail. Remember, Saul's armor as the king would have been this heavy-duty stuff. It would have been Saul, we know from the earlier passages, was a head and shoulders above her. He's a tall, big guy. David, we know, is a boy at this age. So he's this little kid. So here he is clunking around in Saul's heavy armor. It's way too big for him. David put it on, strapped the sword over it, and took a step or two to see what it was like, for he had never worn such things before. See, David had just grown up in basketball shorts out on the hills and t-shirt. That's all he wore out there. He's like, you're putting this heavy-duty stuff on me. He's like, I can't go in these. I'm not used to them. So David took them off again. He picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream and he put them in the shepherd's bag. And then, armed only with his shepherd's staff and a sling, he started across the valley to fight the Philistine. You know, legend has it that David took 5 stones, one for Goliath and each of his brothers. I don't know, maybe that's true. Maybe he took extra in case he missed and he wanted a backup shot. He wanted extra ammo. I don't know. But the bottom line is, when David walked onto the battlefield that day, he had a slingshot, he had a stick, and a pocket full of rocks. And with that little, he was fully confident that he was coming onto that battlefield for a win. His confidence wasn't in his own ability. It wasn't in his strategy. It wasn't in the size of the sword that he couldn't even carry. It wasn't in the strength of his armor that somebody else had built. His confidence was in the Lord. His confidence was in God. Goliath walked out toward David with the shield bearer ahead of him, sneering in contempt at this ruddy-faced boy. Am I a dog? He's like, am I a dog that you come at me with a stick? He cursed David by the names of his gods. Come over here. He's like, I'm going to give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals, Goliath yells. See, Goliath was insulting every aspect of David. He cussed out David in front of everybody. Goliath and everybody else could see that here was this giant of a man fully outfitted with all the weaponry of that day, fully armored. And here comes a little shepherd boy in his t-shirt and basketball shorts with a stick and some rocks in his pocket. Everybody that was watching could only see a giant and a boy. They could only see complete and absolute destruction. David is the only one on the battlefield that day that could look up to the hills of Bethlehem and could remember story after story of the faithfulness of God and of the victories of how God had given him victory after victory. And he reflected back and said, this is what God did for me back then, and this is what he will do for me today. I will run out onto that field, not in my own strength, but in the strength of the God who I know has been with me and has walked with me these years. David replied to the Philistine, you come at me with a sword and a spear and a javelin? He's like, bro, that is JV. That ain't nothing. He's like, I'm coming to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Goliath, you think you're fighting me? You got the wrong opponent. You're fighting that God up there on the hills. Welcome to the big league, man. Let's go. John talks about this same type of winning attitude. He's like, man, you're already a winner. You're already a winner because the Spirit of God is in you, and he is greater than the spirit that's in the world. That's a message to us. David knew that God was with him. He had full confidence that he was running onto that victory to get a W in his column. Today, the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you, and I will cut your head off. And then I will give the dead bodies of your men to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. And everyone assembled here will know that the Lord rescues his people, but not with the sword and the spear. This is the Lord's battle, and he will give you to us. David knew that God could do this, and that's why he was so confident, and he could shout back at Goliath, let's fight. See, some of you have spent so much time and energy focusing on your opponent. You're so fixated on the problem at hand and trying to solve it and trying to figure out a solution and trying to network some kind of friend group in to make this thing work. You're like, I gotta get this thing together. I'm gonna analyze, I'm gonna buy this, you're got all these strategies in mind. You're looking here. David was looking here. Stop looking down. Bethel, stop looking at yourself and saying, okay, I got the solution. Some of you are like, man, I'd like to do that, but I don't deserve it. I don't deserve the help. You know what? You're right. You don't. You don't. You've failed enough times. You've quit enough times. You've done the wrong thing enough times that you don't deserve it. You don't deserve God to help you, but you know what? That is the beauty of the grace of God. That's the beauty of the grace of God, that not only is he able to do it, but he's willing. He loves us. His grace and his mercy is sufficient. It's all you need. David's saying, listen, I'm going to invite God into this situation, and I'm going to rest in him. Where's my help come from? Goliath, your help's coming from your sword and the extra 2 or 3 feet that you got on me. He's like, it's coming from your spear. your shield. He's like, my help, it doesn't come from that army behind me. It doesn't come from King Saul. He's like, my help comes from the God of the hills, the God of the mountain, the one that helped me in all the other situations that I've been through. That's my hope. He's like, you coming at me with that stuff, I'm coming at you in the name of the Lord. And Bethel, the more that we get that attitude into ourselves and our minds, the more that we approach the battles and the struggles that we face, and I don't care what the struggle is. I don't care how big or how small it is. It's inviting God into all of those things. It may simply be how you feel about yourself. Lord, I feel I've got this self-image issue I've dealt with for so long. Maybe you know the reason, maybe you don't. Maybe it's because somebody that was an authority over you just shot you down your whole time, your whole life. And you can't get past that. Listen to me. At some point or other, you're going to have to recognize that that is a giant. That is an enemy that you're facing. And at some point or other, you're going to have to decide, okay, I'm not coming at this thing anymore for my own strength and strategy and my own thing. I'm going to instead ask God to step in. And I'm going to come at this thing from God's point. And at some point or other, you're going to have to come to the place where you're saying, okay, listen, I'm going to stop coming at this in my own strength and my own strategies. And instead, I'm going to come at this from God, the Lord of heaven's armies, the maker of heaven and earth. That's the name Jehovah, my rescuer, that comes to help. Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for the promises even in this narrative that we read about David's life. And so, Father, I ask that as your children, as your people, that we would, Lord, not be focused on the problems, that we wouldn't be focused on our situations, that we wouldn't be focused on our ability or inability, that we wouldn't be focused on our worthiness or our lack of worthiness, but instead we would keep our eyes fixed on you, who is the starter and the finisher, the one who is the beginning of it all and the end of it all, the one who starts the battle and the one who will finish the battle. Lord, help us to keep our eyes focused on you. In Jesus' name we pray. And all God's people said, amen. Verse 48, as Goliath moved closer to attack, David quickly ran out to meet him. David is running to the battle, not afraid. He's driven by this principle that he is going to be a part of destroying the enemy who is mocking God. David's confidence is not in his own ability or strength. He's trusting in God. And reaching into a shepherd's bag and taking out a stone, he hurled it with his sling and hit the Philistine in the forehead. And the stone sank in, and Goliath stumbled and fell face down to the ground. And so David triumphed over the Philistine with only a sling and a stone, for he had no sword. And then David ran over and pulled Goliath's sword from its sheath. And David used it to kill him and cut off his head. And when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they turned and ran. The very tool and instrument that was on the battlefield that was there to kill David, that was the very instrument that God used to destroy the enemy. The message that was sent to destroy you, the discouragement that was sent to take you out, God can take that very message, that very report, and he can turn it around for your benefit if we keep our eyes focused on him. And the men of Israel and Judah gave a great shout of triumph. They rushed after the Philistines, chasing them as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron. The bodies of the dead and the wounded Philistines were strewn all along the road from Shaaraim as far as Gath and Ekron. And the Israelite army returned and plundered the deserted Philistine camp. Listen, this was the day, just like any of the other days before. They would have awakened that morning realizing, okay, we're just going to go back out to the battlefield. Goliath's going to yell at us. He's going to cuss us out. We're going to all feel small and afraid, and then we're going to walk back home to bed. It had been 40 days of that. They got up and they expected to look at the situation, look at the giant, look at their own abilities, look at their own plan and strategy, and once again walk away defeated. But something different happened on this day. A kid showed up who didn't look at the ability of the giant. He didn't look at his own ability. He looked at the ability of God. God showed up when somebody could look at his ability over the ability of the enemy. Listen, Bethel, Peter tells us, stand firm, be strong. Throughout God's word, we read time and time again about people like David who trusted not in their own ability, but instead trusted in God's ability. The next time that you face a situation, or a scenario, or a challenge, or a relationship, or some type of fight, the next time you encounter a giant, try focusing on God's word and on God's ability instead of the problem at hand. Try trusting that God will show up, that God will meet you. Try placing your confidence in God's ability instead of your own ability. And then sit back and trust that God and watch him do the miraculous. Bethel, that's the people that God calls us to be. People that are fixated on God and his ability far more than we are on the situation at hand. God bless you. Have a great week.